I think it's finally time that I write this down. It's haunted me for years, but maybe this'll help me move on. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for what happened that night. I was 15. My girlfriend, her brother, my best friend and I had come up with the brilliant idea to stay out all night on Halloween. We had the perfect plan. My friend Art, not his real name, and I would tell our parents that we were going to spend the night at Layla's and Will's, not their real names either. Likewise, Layla would tell her parents that she and Will would be spending the night at my house. I know, it was stupid. But we were confident that our plan would work. I wish the plan had failed. That Halloween night, we'd set out, feeling like total rebels. We had all decided on a group costume, and each one of us was dressed as a DC superhero. Will had dressed as Superman. Art was the Flash. Layla was Supergirl. And I was Batman. We were all pumped. We had the whole night to stuff our faces with candy, hang out, and, well, do whatever we wanted to do. After we'd trick-or-treated for about 3 hours, I'm not kidding, people started shutting their doors. And by 12, there wasn't a single light on or door open. We four were the only people out on the street, and with the exception of a barking dog, there was no noise. Layla and I were bored, and I asked if we should just go home. Will refused. "You're at a sleepover at my house, remember? And I'm sleeping at yours. Do you want to be the one to admit to your mum that you lied?" "Come on, Will," Art spoke up. He'd been eating a lot of candy and had been pretty quiet for the last few minutes, likely battling a massive stomachache. "This isn't as fun as you said it would be. Maybe it'd be better if we just went home and told the truth. They'll be mad, but maybe we can still have an actual sleepover." Will looked at each of us, and he realised that he was the only one who wanted to stay out. He sighed and looked like he was about to relent. Then, he looked behind us, and his face lit up like a jack-o'-lantern. "What's that?" he said excitedly, already beginning to move towards it. I turned around. Not 20 feet away was a house that I'd never seen before on our street. It looked like a typical townhouse. That's usually what you see in our neighbourhood. But it was covered from porch to chimney with Halloween decorations. And not the cheap plastic ones you get at the dollar store, but the quality, make you want to run decorations that give kids nightmares. There were 2 disturbingly lifelike pumpkin-headed scarecrows guarding the front gate, and over 24 skeletons standing at attention in the front yard. Jack-o'-lanterns dotted the porch, each one with a face frozen in agony. A gigantic spider was perched in the show window, looking like it intended to make the shrub it was hovering over its next meal. Bones were scattered across the roof, as if someone had just dropped a handful of them from the sky. And, for the finishing touch, a spotlight, hidden among the shrubbery, made the entire house glow in eerie purple. Layla and I exchanged a glance. How had we not seen this house earlier? Granted, we hadn't been paying close attention to every house we passed, but still, we'd been all over town. we would have noticed a glowing purple house, right? I turned to ask Art, but he was just as entranced as Will. Before I could blink, he was running towards the house too. Once again, I glanced at Layla. She shrugged her shoulders, as if asking what I expected from two Halloween-crazed boys. I grabbed her hand and we ran after them. Up close, the house was even more disturbing. The scarecrows eyed us as we walked through the front gate. I tried not to gag as I passed them. Someone had certainly taken liberties to make the yard believable. The things stank like rotting pumpkins. I gripped Layla's hand a little tighter as we passed the skeletons. They must be from one of those expensive artisan websites, I thought. They sure didn't look fake. We walked up the porch steps, with Will shaking from excitement. Art's eyes were practically glowing. I remember wondering, half jokingly, if they were in some kind of trance. Will rang the doorbell. It was the sound of a church bell, and it resonated throughout the house.
Trick or treat!
We shouted dutifully, although Layla was practically crushing my hand. I was grateful for it. I needed to know that I wasn't the only one who found all of this unsettling. The door was practically thrown open. A gorgeous woman stood in the doorway. She had long legs, thick copper hair that stopped at her shoulders, black eyeliner and blood-red lipstick. She was dressed in a revealing witch costume and grinned when she saw the four of us.
Oh my. I didn't expect to be visited by two handsome heroes tonight.
She gave a high-pitched giggle. Her voice reminded me of how ladies in old gangster movies talk. Art smiled and thanked her. Will was just staring at her. I took a step closer to Layla, and that's when the lady noticed us. I think she knew immediately that we weren't as captivated as the boys were. Not by her house or her beauty. Sure, she was gorgeous, but she was an adult, and I was already with Layla. Her eyes glazed over as she saw us, but her smile didn't waver. I noticed then that she was holding a bowl of candy. She slowly extended it to me.
Candy, Batman?
I wrapped both my arms around Layla and took a step backwards from the lady. I could tell she wanted something, and that it wasn't anything good. No thanks. We've eaten too much candy already. It wasn't a lie. We'd eaten half of our candy throughout the evening. The woman's smile wavered, and she blinked 3 times, as if it was the last thing she'd expected. I noticed something strange about her eyes. They were kind of cloudy. She turned and offered candy to the boys. Will took a full handful, while Art only took 2, obviously still suffering from a stomachache. I glanced again at the candy. The pieces, they weren't in wrappers, and it didn't look like any brand I'd ever seen. It sort of resembled malted milk balls, except bigger and lumpier. When the boys had finished their candy, the woman looked at the 4 of us.
You must be parched. Why don't you come in for some apple cider?
She gestured to the front door, which stood gaping open, like a mouth. Layla physically leaned away from the door She wouldn't go in there for $1,000, let alone a glass of cider, and I agreed with her. I forced a smile. No thank you. We turned and started to get down off the porch when I realised that Layla and I were alone. Will and Art were gone, and so was the woman. My heart rate tripled. They went in the house. My stomach hurt. Should we call the police? What could we say? That a pretty lady with a spooky yard had lured 2 boys into her house with apple cider? Even if that didn't sound crazy, we were 2 teenagers out past midnight on Halloween. Not exactly what the cops would consider trustworthy. Plus, we couldn't prove that she wanted to hurt the boys. Still, we had to make sure that they were okay. We started walking around the house. On the left side, there weren't any windows. This made sense though, it being a townhouse and all. The back of the house had a porch, but the windows and doors were all covered. The right side of the house yielded the same results as the left, leaving us only one option: the show window. We manoeuvred around the skeletons in the yard and went as close as we dared up to the window. I, being dressed in black and thus harder to see, decided to look in the window while Layla, dressed in bright red and blue, made sure that the lady didn't come out of the house. Before peering in, I took an uneasy glance at the giant spider. Against my better judgment, I touched it. Solid plastic. I sighed and told myself not to be so jumpy. I peered through the window. I was staring at a lit fireplace. It seemed to be the only light source in the room. It was pretty dim in there. Still, I could make out 2 enormous armchairs on either side of the fireplace. I could make out Art's bright red Flash costume, and I could see the blue from Will's costume. They were both slumped in the chairs, as if asleep. There was a coffee table between the chairs, holding 2 half-empty glasses of what could only be apple cider. In the centre of the room stood the lady. She was standing up as straight as a rod, her arms lifeless at her sides. Then, with no warning, her right arm shot straight up. She held it there for a second, and then let it fall. A second later, she did it again, with the other arm. And then, I swear, she started growling. And as if this was a signal, Will and Art got up. I could tell that their eyes were closed, but they came right over to her. She put her left index finger on Art's forehead and her right index finger on Will's forehead, and she began to chant. All 3 of them suddenly began to convulse. Art went down, followed by Will. They both started to kick wildly. Then, their kicks became weaker, as if they were losing energy. And then they stopped. I must have made a noise. Layla told me later that tears were streaming down my face. I must have sobbed without knowing it, because the lady turned around. Her eyes were completely blue, with no pupils to be seen. Her mouth was hanging open. with saliva the colour of her eyes dripping from her lips. And her face was starting to melt. I screamed. Layla screamed. I shoved myself away from the window and landed flat on my back. The wind was knocked out of me, but I was too scared to care. Layla yanked me to my feet and we just started running. We charged through the skeletons, which I now thoroughly believe to be real. As we charged through the gate, I knocked over one of the scarecrows, and its head smashed to bits on the ground, revealing a human skull underneath. We ran, not knowing where we were going and not caring. We finally ended up in front of my house and we both collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing. I told my mum everything. At first she thought I was making up a story to get out of lying to her. But one look at our faces and she knew we were serious. She called the cops immediately. When they investigated the strange house, they made a shocking discovery. It belonged to a Miss Smith, not her real name, who was a woman in her 20s and fit our descriptions. But she'd been on vacation in Alabama with her mother for the last 2 days. They never found their bodies. Art and Will remain missing to this day. The police don't believe our account of some life-sucking witch. They believe that a child predator drugged them and ran off with them. I don't think Layla and I ever really got over it. We broke up in 12th grade when she and her family moved away for a fresh start. A few months later, I moved too. We text now and then, but we aren't as close as we used to be. Still, I'm glad I saved her number all of these years because tonight, I saw something that brought back that traumatic Halloween. A townhouse, bathed in purple light, with skeletons set up in the front yard. 2 of them guard the gate. One is dressed in a Superman costume, and the other is dressed as the Flash.